Are you one of the 40% of Americans who pay $0 in taxes? That's right. Over 40%, almost half of US households do not pay taxes. This means there's a minority of Americans left footing a majority of the bill. A bill that totaled a whopping $4.8 trillion in 2022. And as tax day in 2023 comes and goes, the story will be the same. Now, you might think this would mean that many people would be very happy with the current tax situation, given the fact that almost half of Americans pay little to no taxes. But if you're on one side of the aisle, all that you ever want is to make the other half of America pay more in taxes. And if you're on the other side of the aisle, you give lip service to paying less in taxes while just saddling future generations with even more debt. Debt which right now is running up against a ceiling yet again, facing another catastrophic risk of default. And given the Congressional Budget Office's projection that the fiscal policy right now is large and unsustainable, it is an understatement to say that the tax situation in the States is a little bit of a mess right now. But I'm going to clean it right up for you and explain exactly what the problems truly are and what can be done to fix them, both from a society standpoint and from an individual standpoint. So how do so many Americans pay so little or nothing in taxes? Well, strategy number one is to just be poor. With today's deductions and credits available to everybody, if you don't make that much money, you're not going to be paying that much in taxes. Now, that doesn't mean that your position is enviable, but what it does mean is that the standard rhetoric, especially from the left, that we have the majority of Americans who are poor supporting rich Americans and a wealth transfer that way, at least through taxation, is not true. And in fact, when you break it down by the numbers, you can see that people who earn over $130,000 are paying far and away the most in taxes, paying an average of $125,000 per year, which is more than the bottom four brackets combined. This top bracket paid over $3 trillion in taxes, making up a huge majority of the total $4.8 trillion paid, even though that's just a small minority of people.
First, I'd like to tell you about today's sponsor, I Trust Capital. Today, people are concerned about the purchasing power of their dollars being eroded due to inflation. They're concerned about the returns they're getting on their traditional portfolios, things like stocks and bonds. Many people want to be able to purchase investments that will preserve their purchasing power, things like gold, silver, Bitcoin, ways to store the value of your money without being exposed to the dollar. What's the problem with this? The problem is that most people have most of their wealth in their 401ks, their employer's retirement accounts. And these accounts do not allow people to buy gold, silver, or Bitcoin. Some of them allow access to ETFs that have exposure to these prices. But number one, you're introducing many layers of counterparty risk. And number two, you don't actually own the asset itself. That's where I Trust Capital comes in. I Trust Capital allows you to open up actual retirement accounts, IRAs, traditional and Roth. You can even roll over funds from a previous employer's retirement account to fund this. You can buy gold, you can buy silver, you can buy Bitcoin and even other cryptocurrencies with I Trust Capital. And if you sign up with my link in the description below, you'll get $100 worth of Bitcoin as a sign-up bonus for opening the account.
See, America is not like many other countries. There is this idea that is pushed that America is a poor country with some rich people. That is not the case. America is a rich country with some very rich people. When you look at the data of who is actually paying the majority of these taxes, it's the middle class, the upper middle class, and the rich, not the poor. Now, despite the amount of money that floods into government coffers every single year, the government has just wasted it spectacularly. I mean, $4.8 trillion is a pretty large chunk of change, especially considering the fact that in 2018, that would have been enough to cover the entire federal budget without any deficit. Just in case you're not aware, a deficit is how much the government borrows in excess of what it makes in taxes. So if they make $5 trillion in taxes, they're going to spend $8 trillion, they're going to borrow the extra $3 trillion. That $3 trillion difference between what it makes in taxes versus what it spends is called the deficit. That's how much they borrow. And despite decades of increasing tax revenue and a recent massive spike in tax revenue, we are seeing the debt ceiling issue come up yet again, with Republicans saying, hey, if we raise the debt limit, then we need budget cuts to go along with it. But those budget cuts not even coming close to touching the main drivers of the deficit. Add on top of the fact that the national debt that we have today was accumulated at record low interest rates. And now that the Fed has started to raise interest rates to deal with inflation, that means the interest portion on the debt will only increase over time and very soon could become the largest expense on the government's budget. To sum up this whole government problem, it is not an income issue, it's a spending issue. The government takes more in income every single year. They just spend even faster. So much so that if today the government were to go back to the federal budget that we had in 2018, not 1900, not 1950, just a few years ago to 2018, there'd be no more deficit. They take more in taxes than the entire budget for 2018. It's not revolutionary, it's not disastrous, it's simply backtracking the budget by a few years. But this doesn't even touch on the heart of the problem. Taxation itself, at least in the United States, is theft. And now that I've triggered all of the government lovers who just love forking over half of their annual income to the government every single year and are gonna go comment in this comment section about how great that is, let me explain what I mean. The United States did not have an income tax until the 16th Amendment in 1913. That means the United States went from colonies to global superpower with no income tax. Putting aside being a superpower, just having a thriving society. You'll hear many people today say, oh, you have to have taxes in order to have a nation. Well, we didn't until 1913. Yes, I know there were other taxes, but we didn't have the income tax until then, and today that's the main source of federal government revenue. But there's an even deeper issue with this than just the history and that it's not necessary. There's a morality issue here. The classic example of this is two wolves and one sheep voting on what to have for dinner. You can guess what the outcome would be. There is no choice there. There's the illusion of choice by being given a vote. But it is baked into the cake already what the outcome will be on what will be for dinner. And it's the same thing with taxes. If there is no choice to opt out, then it is no social contract, it is extortion, it is theft. You see, in the free market, people fully expect to pay for something that they want. If you want to watch Netflix, you give them money and you get to access those services. If you would rather drive your own car and you don't want to pay somebody else to drive you around, like let's say Uber, nobody's going to force you to pay for Uber to still survive. With taxes though, it's entirely different. Whether or not you receive any benefit from all of the programs that are being funded and paid for by your tax dollars, you have no choice to opt out on any of it. If you decide not to pay, the government will use its monopoly on violence to arrest you and imprison you for the rest of your life. Work for us for half the year, give us half of everything you make, or else we'll use our violence and imprison you forever. Freedom. Gotta love it, right? Now, I can already hear people in the comment section again screaming, if you hate it so much, just leave. Well, that's the problem. In most countries around the world, you can just leave. If you live in another country, then you're gonna pay the taxes in the country that you live in, if they have taxes, but you're not gonna have to keep on paying taxes from wherever you were born. In the United States, that's different though. In the United States, regardless of where you live in the world, you still have to pay taxes back to the US, just because you happened to have been born there. And still there's people thinking, well, then expatriate, just leave. And that's fine, but the US also has an exit tax, meaning there is no choice. They will extract from you everything that they decide to extract from you. And if you try and stop them, you die in prison. Now, even if you disagree with the moral aspect of this, there's also the little teensy-weensy detail of the legal issue with federal income taxes. The 16th Amendment grants Congress the power to collect taxes on incomes. So the question is, what is an income? Now, we've all been conditioned today to look at our wages and the money that we earn as income. But legal definitions matter in cases like this. And the Supreme Court defines income as gains and profits from corporate activity. Corporate, not individual. Business profits. Now I need to pause here and let you know that most of the people who have taken this approach and said, hey, legally speaking, I don't have to pay my income taxes, have died in prison. This is because America is not a country governed by rule of law anymore. It's a country governed by rule of man, meaning that despite what the law says or the Constitution says, what the people in power through the monopoly on violence decide to do can be very different. So I'm absolutely not recommending anybody take this approach because there are far smarter ways to pay less in taxes that won't get you in trouble with the IRS. Strategy number 1 to pay less in taxes is obviously to be poor. I think this is the stupidest strategy, but many people will look at their income and they'll say, hey, I don't want to make more because then I'll be paying more, I'll be in a higher tax bracket. That's all hogwash. I do not recommend that strategy because why would you sacrifice a higher standard of living just so that somebody else doesn't get a cut of it? So yes, if you make a small enough amount for that standard deduction to cover you, and maybe you have a couple kids and so the tax credits help you out, there's a good chance that you won't have to pay any taxes. But you're not exactly going to be moving into the penthouse with that strategy. The second strategy is to be an investor over an employee. Capital gains tax rates have much more favorable brackets than income taxes do, ranging from 0 to 20% on long-term gains, as opposed to the 10 to 37% for income. In addition to that, the tax rate on dividends from income from your investments is in between 0 and 20%. Again, much more favorable than W-2 wages. Now you might be looking at that and thinking, well, that's great for anybody who's already wealthy, but that doesn't necessarily help me out because that 12-cent dividend from my ETF portfolio at Robinhood isn't going to do me much good regardless of how low the taxes are on it. And that's where we get to the third strategy, which is basically operate as a business rather than an employee. The reason why employees pay so much in taxes is because they don't have the tax breaks available to businesses. This is why in 2021, corporate taxes only made up 6% of all federal tax revenue, as opposed to individual taxes making up 42%. But the good news here is that these business tax breaks are available to anybody, not just large corporations. Anybody that starts a business. There are absolutely tons of tax breaks that you can get by operating a business instead of operating as an employee. Even if you just take a hobby, something you like to do, and you turn it into a side hustle. You are now operating a business and you can start to take advantage of tax breaks. Things like transportation, home office, equipment purchases like computers, travel expenses for vacations that you also do work on for your side business. The tax breaks available to businesses are basically endless. And really it comes down to one basic difference between employees and businesses that makes it so attractive. You as an employee, you'll make, let's say $100,000 this year. You'll pay taxes on the full $100,000, and then whatever is left over, you're able to spend however you choose. Businesses, though, are different. If a business makes $100,000 in revenue, it spends its money on its business expenses, whatever those expenses are, and whatever's left over is what it pays taxes on. This goes back to the Supreme Court's definition of income, meaning profits from corporate activity. That's profits. That is revenue minus expenses. That one basic change from employee to business could save you hundreds or thousands of dollars on taxes. I think Tom Wheelwright said it best in his book, Tax-Free Wealth, that it is the most patriotic thing that you can do to pay as little as possible in taxes. Why? Because number one, you may be a person who trusts the government, believes in the government, thinks they have your best interests at heart, and thinks that they're spending your money in the best way possible. Well, guess who wrote the tax code? Guess who created all those tax breaks? Guess who created all those deductions and credits? The government. It's because they know it incentivizes certain behaviors, and they believe it will be better for our country if people use those incentives. They put them there so that people will do those things. And so if you love the government, it is the most patriotic thing you can do to take advantage of all those things that they want you to do. But number two, you may be a person who completely distrusts the government. You want them to have as little of your money as possible because you see the waste. You see the $4.8 trillion that they brought in 2022. You see the fact that a very small minority of Americans are footing that bill. And you see the fact that they are on an unsustainable path towards crushing the country with spending more money than they could ever take. And if this is true, it is the most patriotic thing you can do to let them have less money to waste. Keep it for yourself because you are going to do something much better with it than they will, whether it's saving or spending it on something that is important to you or giving it away to a charitable cause. Whatever you choose to do with it is going to be better than whatever they will do with it. So with another tax season coming and going, be the best American you can be and pay as little as possible in taxes. As always, thank you so much for watching. Have a great day.